911, what's your emergency?
There's blood in the water! She's not coming up! Oh my god! Please, you have to send someone!
Emergency protocol isn't responding. We can't drop the barrier.
For 10 years, Elena Grayson was the heart of Azure Cove, a world-renowned marine mammal trainer celebrated for her uncanny ability to connect with the ocean's most powerful predator. Her bond with Kael, the park's largest orca, was nothing short of legendary. Crowds cheered, cameras flashed, and every performance was a symphony of trust and control. Until one summer afternoon, before hundreds of stunned spectators, the illusion shattered. What happened that day didn't just end a life. It pulled back the curtain on an industry built on silence, spectacle, and something far more dangerous than anyone wanted to admit. This isn't just the story of a trainer and a whale. It's a story about trust betrayed, warnings ignored, and a question we can't keep avoiding. If stories like this matter to you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Because once you know what happened behind the glass, you'll never see these shows the same way again. From the time she could walk, Elena Grayson felt drawn to the ocean like it was part of her soul. Raised along the rugged coast of Oregon, she would spend entire afternoons lying on the wet sand, watching the waves breathe in and out like a sleeping giant. While other children chased kites or played games, Elena stood still, listening. The sea, in its shifting rhythms and quiet power, spoke to something deep inside her. She believed it had a language, and she was determined to understand it. By 19, that pull had become undeniable. Elena turned down a scholarship to study environmental science, packed a duffel bag, and left for California. There, she enrolled in a marine mammal training program just outside Santa Cruz. Her days quickly filled with the unglamorous demands of the trade-scrubbing algae from concrete walls, hauling buckets of thawed mackerel, learning hand signals until her arms ached. But she never once considered giving up. Trainers soon noticed there was something different about her. It wasn't just discipline, it was her stillness. A natural quiet that seemed to invite trust. Animals that were otherwise standoffish would watch her longer, respond faster. She never forced a connection. She waited for one. And over time, that patience earned her a reputation. She never asked for the one who could listen without speaking. It was at Azure Cove Marine Park where her path truly began to solidify. The park sat perched above the cliffs, like a theater facing the Pacific, its pools reflecting both the sky and everything it tried to hold beneath. There, she met Kael. Kael was enormous. A fully mature male orca with a towering dorsal fin and a mass that rippled with restrained power. Trainers respected him, even feared him a little. He was moody, unpredictable, and slow to trust. But with Elena, something shifted. Where others kept a cautious distance, she stepped closer. Within weeks, they had developed a silent choreography, shared glances, gestures, moments that needed no reinforcement. Audiences watched in awe as Kael lifted her high above the surface, balancing her gently on his rostrum. Each show felt like a celebration of trust, a seamless duet between two beings who, by all logic, should not have belonged together. Her calm anchored him. His presence completed her. They became the heart of Azure Cove, the image printed on every brochure, the stars of the park's most beloved show. Visitors cheered, children screamed her name, but behind all the applause, no one ever stopped to wonder what happens when trust, however deep, begins to fray. Kael did not come from a world of glass walls and artificial tides. He was born into a wilderness of ice and open sea, where orcas moved with the seasons, guided by instinct and kinship. In 1995, that freedom was severed. Off the cold, remote coast of Kamchatka, a pod of orcas surfaced under a low gray sky. What followed was chaos boats closing in, nets unfurling, and panicked calls echoing through the water. Kael, still young, was torn from his mother's side and dragged toward a future he had never chosen. He was moved from facility to facility, each one shaping him into something more compliant. There, under the gaze of trainers and tourists, he was taught how to bow, how to spin, how to present a version of himself that fit the performance. But Kael had memories no whistle could erase. Reports from his early years tell a story that was never told to the public days without eating, long bouts of silence, sudden outbursts, a tail strike that once sent a trainer to the hospital. Yet Kael was powerful, beautiful, and marketable. He became an asset, and assets are rarely questioned. Elena knew pieces of that history, but she believed his past didn't define him. She didn't see danger, she saw damage, and she treated that damage not with caution, but with compassion. After hours, she would stay by the edge of the tank, speaking softly, barely above a whisper, watching his eye as it followed her voice. In return, he seemed to soften, inching closer, offering presence instead of performance. Still, subtle shifts began to emerge. During training, Kael's spins grew sluggish. Sometimes he paused mid-routine, holding back as if lost in thought. In one show, he surfaced late, ignoring a signal entirely. Elena explained it away with a calm smile. "He's just having an off day," she'd say, her tone light, unwavering. But not everyone was convinced. Noah Caldwell, a newer trainer who spent long hours observing Kael's rehearsals, had begun to notice patterns. The Orca's movements felt heavier. His posture, once confident, had grown tentative. The way he held his head lower, slower, made something in Noah's gut tighten. One afternoon, he approached Elena backstage, his voice careful. "Have you noticed his eyes? He looks different lately. Distant." Elena didn't flinch. She just shook her head gently and offered a quiet, almost tired reply. "I know Kael better than anyone." In her voice was not arrogance, but conviction, a belief earned over years of trust. But sometimes, certainty has a way of muffling the smallest warnings. June arrived like a spotlight over Azure Cove. The sun poured down on the stadium's curved bleachers, reflecting off the shimmering surface of the main tank like a mirror to the sky. The performance scheduled that afternoon was more than just another show. It marked a full decade of partnership between Elena Grayson and Kael. It was a celebration, both quiet and grand. Staff lined up early to prepare. Posters of the two filled the entry gates. Children clutched plush orcas and wore headbands with tiny dorsal fins. The show was titled Beneath the Current, a special edition of their usual performance with a new musical arrangement and carefully rehearsed choreography. It would end with Kael lifting Elena skyward, balancing her weight effortlessly as she stood tall above the water, an image designed to symbolize harmony, trust, and the bond between species. Elena had performed this maneuver hundreds of times, but today felt heavier. She adjusted the headset nestled against her ear and smoothed the black-gray wetsuit that clung to her like a second skin. Her breath was steady, though her heart beat a little faster than usual. Not from fear, more from reverence. 10 years meant something. She glanced at the tank. The water was calm, almost still, like it, too, was waiting. When the gates opened, Kael emerged with silent grandeur. His presence alone drew an audible gasp from the audience. 800 spectators, from toddlers to retirees, sat shoulder to shoulder, eyes wide with wonder. Kael glided forward, sleek and precise. Elena stepped into view, her hand extended, a soft signal shared between them. But Kael didn't respond. She tried again, adding a familiar vocal cue, gentle and warm. Still, he lingered in place, unmoving. The crowd didn't notice. They simply waited, expectant and unaware. Slowly, Kael began to move, but not toward his mark. Instead, he drifted past Elena, brushing near her leg in a quiet, unsettling glide. She laughed lightly into her microphone, her voice floating above the music. "He's feeling playful today," she offered, her tone breezy. Laughter rippled through the seats. No one questioned the moment, but from the side of the platform, Noah Caldwell did not laugh. His eyes stayed fixed on Kael's posture, on the unusual tension in his turns. Something wasn't right. He inched forward, hands clenched by his sides, watching for something he couldn't name. Kael circled again, slower this time, as if measuring the space. The air felt too still. Elena remained composed, unaware of the unease building in the wings. And then, without warning, Kael shifted his weight and surged upward. At first, it looked like a misstep, a slip, perhaps. But when Elena hit the water, there was no choreography in the splash. In the seconds that followed Elena's fall, the world above the water seemed to hold its breath. No music, no gasps, just a sudden, heavy silence. She disappeared beneath the surface, swallowed by the same pool where she'd spent years, weaving moments of grace and wonder. For those watching, it was unclear whether what they had just seen was intentional or something else entirely. A few clapped hesitantly, unsure of the shift. But that uncertainty began to fracture the moment bubbles broke the surface and red unfurled like ribbons beneath the light. Somewhere near the back row, a child asked if it was part of the act. In the water. Elena reached upward, her body breaking through just long enough to gulp a ragged breath. Her expression was no longer composed, it was raw and startled, as if the world had tilted without warning. She coughed violently, arms scrambling toward the edge, trying to pull herself back into control, back into air, into safety. But then she was gone again. Kael didn't move like an animal in rage. He was deliberate, almost detached. His form sliced through the water with the grace of something ancient, unburdened by choreography or expectation. In that moment, he was not a performer. He was something older, something unreachable, on deck. Noah didn't hesitate. He broke protocol, rushing to the nearest control panel, shouting for assistance. The sharp screech of the emergency alarm pierced the stadium as staff sprang into motion. Orange buoys were tossed into the tank. Distraction toys were deployed. Commands were shouted sharp, practiced, urgent. Kael didn't respond to any of it. He remained focused, his presence strangely quiet amid the chaos. No trainers entered the water. No one dared. Then he surfaced again. Elena floated near the center of the pool, her body still, her arm bent unnaturally, her wetsuit torn near the shoulder. The water around her no longer swirled, it sat still, colored with something that didn't belong. A hush fell once more, deeper than before. It was as if the entire space realized, all at once, that something irreversible had just occurred. In the moments that followed, the atmosphere inside Azure Cove fractured completely. What had begun as a celebration of connection had turned into something no one was prepared to witness. The audience no longer sat in anticipation. They stood, stumbled, or fled. Screams rose from every corner of the stadium. Children clutched their parents, sobbing, confused. Others froze, too stunned to move, eyes locked on the water as if it might explain what they had just seen. And yet, in the center of it all, Kael was still watching. His eyes didn't dart or blink. They held a gaze that didn't search for anything. It was as if he wasn't in the same reality as the people surrounding him, as if the noise had faded and only he and the water remained. There was no aggression in his body, no frenzy, just a persistent presence focused, distant, and deeply unmoved by the panic on shore. Security rushed to act. A net meant to divide the tank failed to deploy correctly, snagging awkwardly on a side railing. One staff member tripped while attempting to activate the acoustic deterrent system, falling hard on the platform. Shouts rang over radios, but commands overlapped, tangled in urgency. For all their protocols, nothing moved fast enough, and Elena, once the center of every show, now drifted silently. Kael rose again, his movement precise, almost slow. With barely any resistance, Elena's body lifted into the air and turned mid-arc before falling back into the pool. The sound that followed was sharp and final, one that didn't echo, but cut straight through the crowd's collective breath. Trainers finally reached her side. One dropped to her knees, starting compressions with mechanical rhythm, her face pale and focused. Another clutched a radio, voice shaking, asking for medics over and over again. But no response came fast enough to change what had already unraveled. Kael no longer lingered near her. He had retreated to the opposite end of the tank, where the shadows were longer and the seats beyond the glass stood empty. His body floated, barely moving, his dorsal fin slicing through the surface like a silent sentinel. He didn't look toward the trainers. He didn't look back. Instead, his gaze settled on the rows of vacant seats, once filled with clapping hands and smiling faces. Now, there was only silence, heavy and absolute. The pool, for all its light, had grown darker, as if the water itself had absorbed the truth and chosen to keep it. There were no sirens yet, no announcements, only the quiet rise and fall of breath, some frantic, some fading, and one that had stopped completely. The gates of Azure Cove Marine Park never opened that morning. By sunrise, a line of news vans had formed outside its entrance, their antennas reaching toward the sky, like questions no one was ready to answer. Security guards paced in silence. The pool where thousands had once gathered to marvel at Orca acrobatics was now still, the surface flat and untouched, as if waiting for something that would never return. Within hours, the footage began to circulate. It played on repeat on news broadcasts, in online articles, across social media. People watched the same few seconds over and over again. The moment Elena vanished beneath the surface, the crowd's reaction, the stunned stillness that followed. Her name was no longer printed beneath show schedules or photos on brochures. It now filled headlines, threaded into hashtags, framed by candlelight vigils and handwritten signs. She had become more than a trainer. She had become a symbol. See, but as the public mourned, a deeper question emerged. How had this happened? The silence began to crack. At first, it was a single leak, an incident report buried years earlier, noting Kael's refusal to respond to cues and signs of stress following large performances. Then came another, an email between senior staff acknowledging an increased agitation pattern that had yet to be addressed. Soon, an entire archive surfaced. Warnings from junior trainers, observations from behaviorists, red flags that had been raised, then quietly dismissed. One email read plainly, "Too valuable to sideline. We'll monitor. Elena can handle it." And she had tried. Her family, grieving but determined, released parts of her personal journal to the public. In it, Elena wrote of quiet concerns, of moments when Kael no longer felt present, when his eyes didn't meet hers the same way. "He feels distant lately." One entry read, "Like he's slipping away from me. But if I can't reach him, who will inside the park?" Kael remained. He was not relocated. He was not destroyed. He simply stopped performing. The routines ended. No trainer entered the water. He swam alone, circling the perimeter of the tank at irregular hours, surfacing only when necessary. He ate, he breathed, but he did not engage. One evening, weeks after the incident, a janitor passed by the tank during a late shift. He paused, drawn to the quiet. There was Kael, floating just beneath the surface, unmoving. His gaze fixed on the stadium seating at the exact spot where Elena had always stood before each show began. The janitor swore he didn't see Kael blink for nearly 10 minutes. Elena Grayson's death did not pass quietly. It lingered in headlines, in conversations whispered at dinner tables, in the silence that settled over homes where her story was replayed again and again. What began as a tragedy witnessed by hundreds soon became a question that echoed far beyond Azure Cove. How had it come to this in the days that followed? The gates of the park became a place of mourning. Flowers were placed by strangers who had never met her. Handwritten notes curled at the edges in the salt air. One sign read, "She gave her heart to the ocean, and the system drowned her." Another simply said, "Never again." Animal welfare groups seized the moment. For years, they had raised concerns that were too often ignored or dismissed as extreme. Now, with the public finally listening, their message struck a different chord. Entertainment should never cost a life. One campaign declared, images of Kael behind thick glass, adrift in the same tank that had once been his stage, became emblematic of a larger, deeper issue. The hashtag #JoshUpFreeKael began to circulate. It was printed on posters, pinned to bulletin boards, painted across freeway overpasses. Billboards went up along the California coast, images of wild orcas beside photos of concrete tanks. Captivity is a sentence. They read, "He didn't choose this." Lawmakers, too, began to respond. The Orca Protection Act, once stalled in committee, returned to public debate. The legislation aimed to end the breeding, sale, and performance of captive orcas in the state. Hearings were scheduled. Voices filled the chambers. Elena's parents attended, holding her torn wetsuit folded carefully in their hands. It had been rinsed, but the damage remained. As they spoke, the room quieted. They did not demand punishment. They asked for change. Their daughter had trusted the system. That trust had not protected her. No one called Kael a murderer, but no one referred to him as an entertainer anymore either. What had once been framed as a bond, remarkable, beautiful, transcendent, was now seen differently. The truth sat uncomfortably in the space between affection and control, between performance and captivity. Even the most loyal visitors to Azure Cove began to question what they had applauded for so long. They remembered the joy, the beauty, but now, they also remembered the silence that followed it. Because sometimes it takes a crack to reveal the weight of what's been buried underneath. At the entrance to Azure Cove, a bronze statue now stands where a ticket booth once drew eager lines. It's simple in design, no sweeping gesture, no theatrical flair, just the quiet form of a woman, hand outstretched toward the imagined surface of the sea. At its base, a plaque bears her name, Elena Grayson. Below that, a line carved in soft relief reads, "She believed in harmony, and she paid the price." But her legacy reaches far beyond stone and metal. School districts across the state began re-evaluating their field trips. Contracts with marine parks were paused, then canceled. Families that once made annual pilgrimages to see the shows now hesitated, their trust fractured. Ticket sales dropped, tour groups pulled out, and across social media, a wave of reflection took hold. The glossy posters, the dramatic splashes, the choreographed spins, what once felt magical, now felt questionable. People started asking different questions, not just about safety or training methods, but about the deeper premise beneath it all. Were these performances really about education, or were they something else entirely, something more comfortable than truthful, more profitable than kind? And inside the tank, Kael continued to drift. He moved slowly, no longer rehearsing, no longer responding to the signals that once shaped his days. Trainers kept their distance. Visitors were no longer allowed to view him. The glass, once polished daily, remained untouched, clouded with sea spray and time. No one could say what he remembered. No one could explain what stirred behind his unmoving eyes. But one fact remained inescapable. Kael had never asked to be here. Elena had never imagined that her story would carry this kind of weight. She believed in connection, in understanding across species, in something beautiful born of patience and respect. But even the purest intentions can falter when placed inside a system built on control. Now, every conversation about her isn't just about what happened. It's about what continues to happen. Her name surfaces in classrooms, in legislative halls, in the quiet corners of protest signs. She became a mirror, not of failure, but of reckoning. The pool she once danced in now holds a different kind of silence. And the question remains, persistent and unresolved. How many more lives, human or animal, must be lost before we stop calling this entertainment? Elena Grayson believed in something beautiful that with enough patience, love could bridge the gap between human and wild. But her story became a painful reminder of what happens when that belief is placed in a system that values applause over accountability. Kael wasn't a monster, he was a prisoner. And the bond they shared, as real and powerful as it was, couldn't survive the weight of confinement. Her death didn't come from a single mistake. It came from years of warnings overlooked, behaviors minimized, and a refusal to question what people had come to accept as normal. The silence that followed wasn't just about grief. It was about awakening. This isn't just about Elena or Kael. It's about all the lives, human and animal, trapped behind the glass, presented as entertainment. And it's about what we choose to ignore until it's too late. If this story moved you, please like, share, and subscribe. Your voice can be part of the change. The more we question, the more we understand, and only through understanding can we begin to do better.